Welcome, welcome. My name is Ashley Adams. We're going to be discussing about mental health, especially in the African American community. I'm just going to give you a little background about myself. I am a master level social worker, been in the medical field for over 10 years, dealing with diverse population, whether it's with individual, family, the elderly, especially in rural communities. This is something I really am passionate about, mental health, especially when it comes to the African American community. So I do have a PowerPoint. We're going to be going through it. We're going to be talking about the research I conducted. And so I think that is very important for us to get in tune with that. Now, the research that I've done over is entitled Say Something Movement, the double stigma associated with mental health problems in the African American community. This is the overview of what we're going to be discussing, the problem, the research question, the findings, the conclusion, the recommendation. We're going to go through all this because many times we like to deal with symptoms and we never really get to the root of things. And we're going to talk about how to get to the root of things in a healthy, proper way. I wanted to read a little of this, the abstract in regard to the research I've done. Mental health issues are often overlooked or are a challenge to deal with. There are many stigmas associated with mental illness. But imagine having a mental illness and being part of a culture that has its own stigmas. In many African Americans, it's a silent crisis that produces an unresolved issue, and it starts early in life. Various factors include mistrust and disparities prevent people of color from taking advantage of mental health services. In the African American culture, men and women had to learn resilience, survival in a strange land called America. Because of those beliefs, among with their spirituality, a group of people learned how to survive their way without the help of the government. So let's dig into this a little more. Addressing the mental health problem in the African American community while dealing with the double stigma associated with it. Because mental illness has its own stigma associated with it. Nobody wants to be labeled crazy. No one wants to be associated with something that is negative. That's what a stigma brings on. But even in the African American community, there's a lot of stereotypes that is associated and stigma that is associated with African Americans. And stigma is basically a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstances, quality, or an individual. Statistics, the research in it. In the United States, 11% of African Americans do not have health insurance. That's where I got my information from. And that can be a problem if you're looking for help, if you don't have the insurance to pay for it. And many people can't afford to pay private pay. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Service, in 2019, suicide was the second leading cause of death for African Americans ages 15 to 24. So a lot of times we think that if this mental illness or suicide happens in other cultures or other races, not so. It also is a problem in the African American race. A stigmatized people. And I got the slave ship. I got Frederick Douglass on here and the famous poster of the man who just got whipped. We got the civil rights and the young man at the bottom, because when it comes to dealing with any person's health, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, in the medical field, especially I've been in the medical field for a while, we collect data, information, because we want to accumulate the proper physical and history of a person, because not every individual is the same. And we don't want to assume and have bias. So who is your best expert? Who can tell you better about themselves than your resident, than your client? And so a lot of times when it comes to the African American culture and race, many times we want to leave out slavery when it's part of the American history, of a culture history, of a nation history, but we're dealing with America. It's part of our history. And so when you're dealing with an African American man, woman, a young person, you have to think in factors of this, that slavery plays a part of their history. You're talking about a stigmatized people who've been disgraced, came from a foreign land into this country, far away from home, coming against their will, treated as inhumane, like cattle, property, and then working from sun up to sundown, not knowing if they ever going to go back home. Went through many great measures to get to this country. And we're just going to close our eyes to it and not think that has nothing to do or any kind of conjunction to the African American race. It plays a major part because of the fact of how the African Americans were considered not even human, not even a whole person, rejected, voiceless. Many articles, medical, many articles, documentary of how they considered African Americans as basically as beasts. No emotions, no feelings, misunderstood. That is a problem. Because if that's in the history books and wrote in the medical books, and guess what? A person of another culture studies that and have in their mind that all people act like this, that's under this umbrella, that is biased. It should be against our code of ethics, and it should be dealt with properly. So that's why I said double stigma, because we are dealing with a stigmatized group of people who was looked upon as nobody. And if you're looked upon like that, how can you be properly treated? Often misunderstood. Slave ships, first slave ships coming around the 1500s. You're looking at Frederick Douglass, around this couple of centuries ago. And then the civil rights was just a couple of decades ago, when it was segregated but equal. But we understand from the history and documentary that it was no equality in this. Racism. These are some definitions. The belief that different races possess distinctive characteristics, abilities, and quality, especially to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Synonyms: racism, prejudice, discrimination. I got this from PBS.org. Slaves was considered property, and they were property because they were Black. Their status as property was enforced by violence, actual or threatened. We know in the slavery history, we know especially in the African American cultures, that if the freedom came or there no longer can be slaves, the making of the KKK nation to enforce fear. So many times through the decades and years, as we look back, even in the royal rough 60s, many African Americans lived in fear. Because if something should occur, who got their back? The justice system didn't. There was laws that was against them. So we want to go into this and see, how can a people who've been stigmatized get the proper help on something they're battling with that is also stigmatized? So we have to deal with the ugly parts. We no longer can be quiet about it. It's time to shine a light on it. Now, slavery shaped American medicine. I mean, it's no shy away from it. Some would try to paint a pretty picture of it, but in today's society, we got YouTube, we got Google, we got all these search engines, and you can easily free put it in. It's in some colleges, in the books, especially pre-med and different things, depending on what university and college you go to, where they talks about this. But in today's society, on the backs of the women, we have breakthrough in gynecology, because what the physicians did back then was experimented on the slaves, whether it was a woman, a man, or a baby. And listen to this, men, listen, they didn't have no anesthesia, they didn't have no pain medicine, and they was using tools, utensils, experiment to see if this worked. It didn't work, they died. Oh well, let's try another. One researcher said Black people experience less pain than whites. Racial disparities in treatment and patient outcome is a result of racist narratives of superior race doctors, which still affects society today. If you just really think about it and you look at, if you went to the doctor, the ER, and had any kind of lab results, you will see that different cultures are separated with the African American culture. You'll see African Americans results compared to other race results and all that, because of the fact of the matter, it started way back in slavery. And slavery shaped American medicine. And if you got a racist narrative who is celebrated in their role in medicine and is taken upon as truth, what kind of outcome, perception is other students who are coming along after the doctors view of African Americans, especially in regard to when they need help? Can they get the proper medicine they need? Or are we just going to take what an old slave master doctor said about Blacks, that, hey, they don't need that kind of medicine, or they don't need that kind of treatment because they have a tolerance for more pain than the others? If you misunderstand a culture, it's easy to misdiagnose them. If I don't understand you as a practitioner, as a therapist, whatever your profession may be, a teacher, a doctor, a nurse, whatever, if I have a misconception of you, if I do not understand you and take the proper procedures and assessments and interventions and whatever kind of data collection to get to know you by way of you, not with somebody else, by way of your environment, of your family that's associated with you, then I'm subject to misdiagnose you. When a stigmatized race believes the lies, they're in danger of suffering in silence and destroying oneself. I'll purposely put this slide up here because if you ever done any research over the Blackface, I encourage you to. It was set up to purposely dehumanize, make fun of, stereotype the African American race. This is a Caucasian man. You see on the other side, he has his face painted black. And back in the day, they didn't have the television. This was before popularity of the radio. It was coming along. But many times on a Sunday afternoon or during the weekend or whenever, they would go to plays. They would have plays outside or a certain location, and they would have entertainment. And they started the movement of the black face. And what they would do would mock how they perceive how African Americans spoke. And you notice that he painted certain areas because that's how they saw him, whether it was like a bamboo, whether it's like an animal, whether, making fun of their features, even the way they talk as a group of the whole goal was to stereotype them, bring on a negative misunderstanding of this race to make others, especially in the American culture, but eventually when television came, they still had the black face on for a long time. To let other cultures and other individuals, including those in their own culture, get to a place where, guess what, they believe the lie of you're ignorant, you can't speak well, you don't know how to act, and you can't be trusted. So that was being portrayed. And they mocked it and they laughed. And the reason why I put the quote at the bottom, that when a stigmatized race believe the lies, they're in danger of suffering in silence and destroying oneself. Because later on in the centuries of the 1920s and 30s, African Americans started painting themselves too, and mocking themselves too, and making fun of themselves too. So it started bringing on this understanding that if they do it and they agree with what the other superior race is saying, maybe it's true they are ignorant. Maybe it's true the only thing they know how to do is sing and dance and cook and clean and work like cattle. Maybe it's true they can't be trusted. You have to treat them like property or an animal. So I had to put this slide in there because even in this, the making of a stereotype, it can affect a culture. It can affect a group of race of people. It can affect an ethnicity, all because of misunderstanding a lie of a superior race. Research question. What occurs at the crossing of mental health and a person's knowledge as associated of the Black race? What stops a stigmatized group of people, African Americans, from receiving help from a stigmatized disease called mental health? Why does the history matter? And it does. History matters because it tells a story. It tells a story about what occurred, what happened. If this effect, this is the cause of it. It is very detrimental. It's very vital to know the history of your client, to know the history of a student, to know the history of a resident, whatever they are as practitioners, wherever they are as, even as a pastor, as a leader, or any person that's spiritual, to know the history of that person. Can this problem be resolved? Is there hope for the African American culture when it comes to mental health? Because many African Americans do not trust the medical field. Many do not have a local doctor. Many don't have routine checks because of fear. You're going to misdiagnose me, or are you going to give me something that's bring harm? Where did that come from? Where did that ideology, that perception, that view, that when you go to the doctor, they are going to misdiagnose you, or they are going to mistreat you, or try to bring you harm? There had to be something that was passed on, or something you experienced, or somebody in your family experienced, and it brought on a misconception, and it brought on fear. So can this problem be resolved? Is there any hope for the African American culture when it comes to mental health. Well, in my generation, the millenniums, what the baby boomers wouldn't talk about or wouldn't say about, my group of people are talking about. And you have to understand it was a different time then. Even if many did express how they felt, it was limited information. It was limited resources and limited support compared to today. Findings: major issues that prevent seeking treatment. Racism. We talked about that earlier. You don't want to be discriminated against. You give somebody else something because of their race or their class than me. I don't want to be experimented on, because we know about the, if you don't, you can do research over the Tuskegee, the syphilis. That was a major thing that broke out in the 70s, that they was experimenting on African-American men. And because of that, that became a big issue. And there's other experiments that was conducted that was unethical in the African-American people. And so the first thing that comes to a lot of African-American mind is, not me. I'm not going to be part of that experiment. You're not going to use me as cattle. You're not going to experiment on me. So a lot of times what prevent seeking treatment is the fear of being discriminated against, racism. Another issue is, for some, that may not be their problem. They still need help, but they don't know how to afford it. The insurance they have, even though we in this country have affordable insurance where you can get it, certain insurances may cover mental health, some don't. And it is a problem when you're in rural communities, if you don't have the specialists in your area to take the insurance you do have. So a lot of individuals can't afford to pay private pay to talk to a therapist or see a psychiatrist, or afford the medication or treatment that comes with it. So that a lot of times for some people prevent them from getting the proper treatment they need. And of course, the stigma with it, the shame. Because you don't want to be labeled something you're not. You know, we know the famous labels. If you don't, when it comes to mental illness, mental health, you know, crazy or attention seeking, you know, especially in the African American culture. You're just doing that to get a check. Ain't nothing wrong with you. You're all right. A lot of people suffer in silence because they do not want to be misunderstood, mislabeled, or looked upon as somebody that is handicapped. They rather just try to make it through. And a lot of times they suffer in that. You know somebody, whether it's a coworker or a friend or somebody who is homeless, that you know that, hey, they have a mental illness. They're suffering from mental health problems. But because of their income or they homeless or they jobless, whatever the situation is, or the insurance don't cover it, they just continue. They'll try to subside it by doing natural herbs, or they'll try to, you know, overcome it with other form of ways of alcohol or substance use, or some just become very overly spiritual, hoping it will help. Because of the shame and stigma associated with it, a lot of people, it prevents them from getting the proper treatment they need. Here's a quote: "We are in a time as Americans where we must face what our parents try to live with." It's a different time. I know we're glad about that. There is some kind of improvement compared to what our parents went through, our grandparents went through. there is some form of support compared to back then when they didn't have that. It wasn't available to them. Recommendation. You don't have to have a big platform or a big website or a campaign to bring on awareness in your family, awareness in your job, your church. It starts with a conversation. You know, we in the era of the phone. See my phone? We in the era of the phone. We want to text. We want to call. No, we have to get involved. And many times we at the dinner table and the kids got the phone, the spouse got the phone. We in our own little world. No, we can have a conversation because when you're involved and you get become more aware, you'll start knowing that your behavior has changed. I noticed you've been wearing them clothes for the last 3 or 4 days, and that's not like you. I noticed that you're not, bathing. Start a conversation. And even if they're okay, start a conversation with your kids, whether you're a leader, spiritual leader, pastor, clergy, whatever. Boy Scout, Girl Scout recruit, coach, teacher, doctor, therapist, whatever, mom, dad. Start a conversation, even with your spouse. Get the community involved, including the church, the public school district. You know what I'm saying? Get a couple people together and host a health fair if you're not in the medical field. You know what I'm saying? Have a little small group in your gym or in the fellowship hall of the church or in your house or at the park, and let's talk about self-awareness, mental health, where you at, having a conversation, knocking on somebody's door. It don't have to be something grandiose. It just start where you're at with a conversation. How you doing? Where your mind is. To let the other person know that guess what? I see you and I am concerned. Because guess what? We are our brothers and sisters keepers. You want somebody looking out for your kids with the best interest. You want somebody looking out for you with the best interest. We have to do the same. We can no longer sit in silence and just sit somebody and laugh at somebody and mock at somebody by the way they're doing, not knowing that it can be a trauma away, losing a job away, getting a bad news away, where you find yourself battling mental illness and you want the same, or you want grace, or you want compassion. And sometimes we don't render it back. So it starts with us. Sometimes we look at it from everybody else, what they can do, and we need to change the system. It starts with us. I could talk about it because I've been through it. I could talk about it because not just from a person who been in the mental health field and the medical field over 10 years, but also a person who battled with mental illness. And because of the shame, or whether it was religion or being in the medical field, you want somebody to label you as crazy or whatever, I too suffered in silence and to a point where I had a break. And listen, I am, and in my belief, listen, I believe in my belief, but God blessed me to get a therapist too to help me to get out of denial, to open my mouth to say something. It's so important for us to do that. And this is a book on what I went through in regard to mental illness. I had to face it. I no longer be silent with it. These are 3 hopes I want to come to as I come to a conclusion to sum up the whole thing I talked about. Our lives began to end the day we became silent. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. I was not afraid of the words of the violent, but of the silence of the honest. It's time for us to say something. We can no longer suffer in silence. So I hope this has helped you. I hope that this has been something that has been something to really think about, something to really look upon, and something, guess what, we can do together. And guess what? Start where you at. Again, my name is Ashley Adams. I hope this helped you.